Okay. I believe we are live streaming. So I'll turn it to you, Jen.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. I will just call a quick attendance. Alan.
Here.
John Anderson.
Here.
Katie Fellows.
Here.
Roger Beely.
Here.
Steve Berg.
Here.
And Portia Hirschman, not here. And Craig Robinson.
Yep, here.
Great.
So if you'd like, I can bring the agenda back up, but the next item you have is the approval of minutes from December 17th. Let me see if I can find that agenda. There she is. Did I say December 17th? I meant December 7th.
Yep. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So move. Second.
All in favor?
We actually do need to do a roll call vote since we're on
Okay.
Zoom. I'm happy to do it, Jen, unless you
Sure.
like to continue with it.
Sure, go ahead. I'm trying to look at both at the same
Yep.
time. I don't have two screens.
All right, so Roger Beely,
Yes.
Jen Ladd,
Yes.
sorry, caught you right when you went for the drink. Katie Fellows,
Yes.
John Anderson,
Yes.
Alan Paul,
Yes.
Steve Berg,
Yes.
and Craig Robinson.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, before we get into the other agenda items, I will just let the rest of the committee know. Jay and I spoke about this earlier today, and really everything else that we're going to cover is just sort of an update. You know, an explanation. So we don't necessarily need a whole lot of dialogue or back and forth or votes or motions or decisions or anything like that. So if there are questions that you have about any of these items that you think would lead to either longer conversation or require additional information be brought to the table either by staff or someone else. I'm gonna be taking brief notes, Jay, the best that I can off to the side, and we're happy to just kind of park those items there because we will be seeing and hearing more about each one of these items again in the future. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
You want me to jump in, Jen?
Sure. Yeah, if you want to start with the comp plan.
Sure. I think I'll stop sharing my screen just at the moment. So yeah, I think as Jen said, probably could have labeled everything on this agenda as staff updates. You know, there's been a lot of sort of background work happening over the last few years when we talk about the comp plan and more recently. And so we just wanted to be sure that, you know, we brought you all up to speed as we continue work on some other elements that we'll be bringing forward, because I think a lot of this stuff we'll talk about really feeds into all the decision points that we'll have along the way down the road. But with that, I will start by giving an update on the comp plan. Actually, Alan, do you want to jump in? I'll just sort of say, you know, we adopted the comprehensive plan, as folks, I think, remember back in last summer. And for the last few months, the Long Range Planning Committee has been starting to try to dissect the plan and really sort of see what type of efforts, when we look at the implementation plan, who would be the best lead resource on certain elements. And so that's sort of the work that's been going on. So I'll be given I'll sort of put up some detailed information here in a moment, but Alan, not to sort of step on what you might have said, but
No, not at all. I mean, the thing that obviously that we've been trying to do is to figure out how to make the best approach to the plan now that it is, I'll say 90% approved, only because of stuff that's going on at the state and shortages of staff, et cetera, et cetera. But we expect that the plan is going to be approved hopefully within the next several months, or any changes that we need to make can be changed, and we're off and running. But for now, since we've submitted the plan, what we have in place right now is stuff that we can continue to work on. So we have been looking at the plan. Staff basically came up with, I'm picking a number here, a number over 100 action items that we need to take by various groups across town. And certainly with traffic being one of the number one issues that we have here in town, not only as outlined by the plan, but also as outlined by the recent community survey that took place, we know that we've got to do something to address traffic, and there's some major issues that we need to get involved with. So long-range planning basically looked at all of the action items that were out there, and we started to assign a primary and a secondary committee to start working on the projects, whether it be transportation, whether it be shellfish, whether it be sustainability. We went down through and we've made those assignments. As a group now, long-range planning at our last meeting started to work on those items that we assigned ourselves. But you will see very soon via Angela that the items that came out of the comp plan that need to be assigned to the transportation committee will happen very quickly. The assignment we've made, but we got to get it to Angela and then have Angela bring it down to us and then start picking off those items. And I'm sure we'll have a process internally on this committee that's going to determine where do we want to go first, either by sense of need or urgency, but we'll figure that out. So pretty much that's where we are comp plan wise. I think those are the highlights, Jay.
Yep. Actually, I do have that spreadsheet, so I think I'll share that so we can just start to see it. And what I want to do is just walk through, because this is the first time you're going to see it, just sort of show you how to use it. And then I'll send it to you, after the meeting, and we can start to dig in and talk further about it at future meetings. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to start by sharing screen one. Share. You're seeing my screen at this point, I believe. Seeing the comp plan page. So just for those, just so you know, the comprehensive plan is posted on the town's website. You can find it in a number of places. I've gotten to it by going through the planning and codes department. And under there, there's a little section called plans and studies. Click on that and you get the comprehensive plan. So just so you know where to find it. So the comprehensive plan, what I want to show you next, yes. So the comprehensive plan is 177 pages or so. One of the things for those who are familiar with with the 2006 comprehensive plan, which was a very prescriptive comprehensive plan that really laid out very explicitly what actions were to be taken. With this comprehensive plan, the town sort of made the concerted effort to take a different approach and really look at it more holistically in systems and how things are interconnected. And so a lot of the implementation items aren't near as regimented regimented or regulated as maybe the prior comp plan. But what I did just want to show you is at the end of the comprehensive plan, I'm down at the last couple pages, we did create an implementation plan that basically broke out the different recommendations, sort of the action that needs to take place, a general sense of time frame. Is this something we are doing, should be doing soon? And really identifies sort of resources. Is this gonna, and resources means, both just time and energy as well as dollars. So it's a combination. So just to give a sense. Then as we talked about, the committee, the long range planning committee has done, so we took all the action items in this massive spreadsheet and then tried to break them down by who the lead committee would be. And then this one I've broken down, and you'll see I'm clicking tabs at the bottom. Sorry if I did that too quickly for folks. This spreadsheet I have broken down just to sort of those main elements for the transportation committee. These are sort of the items that the transportation committee is intended to be the lead on. And so you can see there's not I think one of the interesting things that Alan was referencing, so we did, the comp plan was adopted locally. It is our standing comprehensive plan of the town. The next thing a town needs to do is send it up to state for state review. And that goes out to various departments of the state. We actually received comments back from Maine DOT that said, they found that our comp plan sort of hit all the marks with issues for transportation, and they found it consistent. And so there is quite a bit in the plan about transportation, but these are really the sort of main action items that came out of it. And, I was sort of going through this a little bit earlier today, and sort of what pops out at me is a number of these items really talk about looking at the streets, not necessarily focused on the cars, but other ways of getting in and around town, multimodal transportation, bikes, peds, transit, in addition to vehicles. But back to sort of the administrative function, when you get this, the way to use this is you'll see in the first category what vision it falls under. So I'm going to focus on vision 5, and then the recommendation number. This is numbers, we have numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. So if you go back to the actual comp plan itself, under vision 5, you see recommendation 2 is actually found on page 56. Number 5 is found on page 125, 7 found on 125. So this way you can, because when you read these recommendations, they're just sentences, but they really need to be read in the context of the plan. So it's important to sort of say, okay, the sentence says, let's just pick on number 5 here. Refine the town's complete streets policy to establish design parameters. Okay, but how do we intend to use that? So then I did. So you go to the plan, here's page 125, and you sort of want to read through sort of all that's going on in this area to get a sense of what that's intended to mean. So that's sort of a how-to guide when, as a committee, we're working through what it means to look at this spreadsheet, and that one sentence in and of itself, it's part of a bigger whole that we need to understand. So I'll stop there for now. See if there's any questions or if what I'm saying is making sense. Roger, if you're saying something, you're muted.
Yeah, regarding this particular one here, I find this kind of interesting because, part of the dilemma of the planning board is we see these developments, maybe like a 10 to a 20 house development, and we just see the particular lot that these structures are going to be on. And maybe it would be better if we had a like a geographic or an environmental, or I'm not sure what the term is, view of the adjacent properties to see where a potential road, even though the other properties may be vacant, where a potential road may be able to go through in the future. So when a developer proposes something to us, we can say that to the developer, well, instead of putting a house on that particular lot, maybe, you should try, we've got to try and preserve that space for a potential connectivity to another lot that's not being developed at this point. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yep. So I think maybe that, Roger, what you're starting to hint at is sort of the action that we look at, because I don't, currently I know you serving on the planning board are familiar with this, within the subdivision ordinance, we do currently talk about trying to create those connectivities with adjacent lots. I think there's a good example up on Sawyer Street. There's a couple subdivisions that we looked at, and how do we go about doing that, right? It's hard when you're looking at one property and you have that developer before you. How much information are we able to ascertain and get about other surrounding lots? So I think that's a good example of, looking as we get into the implementation stage. Maybe that's an area to explore, where we understand what our existing rules are, what those limitations are, and how they may be enhanced to sort of advance the goals of the comp plan.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult, if you were developing something adjacent to a land that's already developed, because those people have purchased, they purchased property thinking it's like a dead end cul-de-sac, and they don't want through traffic.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're talking about vacant land that hasn't been developed yet, if we knew that a certain portion of that land, we could put a road through there at some point in the future, if we could somehow designate that spot. Mm-hmm. That's just one thought I had on that, because it's very difficult. I mean, with the wetlands and everything we have in this town, it's very hard to do connectivity.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, not only a road, Roger, but trails as well, so that people can walk or bike or whatever. So, I mean, that's the whole, when we start thinking about intermodal with the new plan, I think that's one of those things that we've got to consider is how do we connect all of those items potentially from development to development, and where one, as you say, where one is already developed, it makes it extremely difficult to provide connectivity, because there's not very many places in existing developments that are buildable that are not being consumed already. Somebody already owns it.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, and it's interesting, as I was sort of looking at the things we're going to update in this plan with respect to the comprehensive plan, and the next item, the Downs transit study, and even the community survey, really thinking about, traffic is certainly sort of an issue that I think resonates with most residents and is an area where folks have an interest. And I think, as a community, starting to think about, can we continue to build our way out of the issues, right? And I think that's what this comprehensive plan and these other studies are, starting to move in the direction of, is, unless we want Route 1 to be an 8-lane highway and Gorham and Payne Road to be 4 or 6 lanes, starting to really look at, are there ways to minimize the number of vehicles on the road, or at least times that people have to be out of the road, fully understanding we're not getting rid of the cars on the road. That's not, I think, at all what's, but it's about providing for other modes, particularly as we look at, driving growth to certain areas in town, trying to direct growth, enable people who wish to live in these areas to sort of live and work and do their daily shopping without necessarily having to drive through the Oak Hill intersection or what have you. And so I think, this is just sort of it's all part of the complex stew of transportation planning.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, these highlights and action items as extracted from the comp plan are really good. I'm really interested to see and hear our later agenda item about the results of the survey that came in, which I'm sure are probably not super surprising to anyone, but I think these are all sort of like little pieces, little pieces of information all sort of moving in the right direction. Like everyone knows there's more people here. There's more traffic now than there was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, probably even 5 years ago. And nobody really likes that. But the fixes for those things, I think, represent some pretty significant changes. And so I feel like there's also a lot of education, maybe, maybe not through like a formal campaign, like media. I'm not a media person, a marketing person, but like not a formal, communications out from the town, but even just like among each of our circles and our smaller communities, just starting to have some of these conversations about how we can, how we can work to avoid getting to a point where we are in total gridlock or headed towards debilitating gridlock here in such a way that it takes you 20 minutes to get through the Oak Hill intersection at 3 o'clock. Right now, I really believe that we are at a crossroads on this where we can either choose to begin to address a lot of these issues in ways that I think the comp plan has done a good job at identifying. Multimodal, is this trip necessary? Is this trip necessary at 5 o'clock, or could this trip be made at 2 o'clock? Is this a bikeable distance? Do I need to drive my kid to school in my own car, or can they ride the bus? Kind of those kind of things. Can I ride the bus instead of driving my own car? That we can kind of go two directions. We can start to mitigate that now and have these like smaller culture changes, or we can get to a point where it is so uncomfortable that we really have to make some major adjustments, and those tend to be much more costly and much more impactful, and people don't really like change at that kind of scale. None of us do. So this is work that I'm excited about for this committee and for our community overall. And I just would, as we continue to revisit both this spreadsheet and the comp plan in general, I would just encourage all of us to look for those opportunities to kind of share that information back out with our own families and friends and neighbors and people new to the area, and just, helping to paint the picture of what the type of community that we want here, and how this transportation really fits into that, which I think it does in a pretty significant way. And we can all tell that anytime you have to go to the grocery store at 6 o'clock.
As long as I can recall, and Alan may confirm this, traffic has always been a complaint in this town. I mean, even 30 years ago or 40 years ago, traffic was an issue.
Yeah, we're not really set up well for it, frankly. Like our geography doesn't lend itself well to like an efficient.
But we have something going for us right now, though. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the survey was correlated very closely to the comp plan regarding traffic, right? Which doesn't surprise me. But now we have the Downs DOT plan, right? That's going to make a significant change. I suspect the vast majority of citizens have no idea that that's even in the works. And I've said this many times. I think it's really incumbent upon the town to make sure the citizens know what's going to be going on, and it's going to be a multi-year thing, and they'll see something, concrete being done about dealing with some of the traffic issues. That can go a real long ways. But if we just announce something like 3 months ago or 2 months ago, and then they don't see anything for a year, and then they might see something else again in another year, they won't make that connection. So I really think communicating what's going to be happening, it's really significant. And the townspeople should really know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Roger. And, I think through other means, like at the communications committee, we recently talked about the survey results and kind of the 4 key areas that were kind of like the big takeaways. One of them was the traffic and transportation. And so we're trying to think of like, how do we build that as a theme more into our communications this year, since that was clearly a top one. And I see this committee being a big feeder of information that we can get out more and more into the community, just to kind of keep things top of mind, make sure they know what's going on. What you just mentioned with the TMP, I think is like a really great example of a solution that's coming. It's going to take time, but let's keep that top of mind for people so that they know improvements are on the way. Same thing with like that conversation we had recently with the MTA on the potential Gorham bypass. Like again,
Exactly,
these are all things that are coming, but they all take time. And when we got the survey results, one of the things I asked Angela was like, just remind me what's already happening, because I know there's already a lot going on. And I feel like this group, I don't know how this group feels about it, but it's stuff that I've seen, but I haven't seen it frequently enough to like truly absorb it. And I'm wondering if before thinking about like what's next and what we do, just baselining on what's already coming, what's already planned. And again, we can continue to communicate that through various means as a town and through the council. But like, I feel like that's important because I think there are a lot of solutions already underway, right? Like, I don't know if we need to add more just yet, but like endorse and support the ones that are already moving and discuss those potentially. And then parallel, maybe identify additional things over a period of time. So that's what I would be really interested to get this committee's feedback on, is like, there's already a lot happening. What's super important that we want to make sure continues, that you guys think is a priority, so that we can help communicate and get the word out and do more. But also, to Jay's point, I love what they're trying to do with the comp plan to kind of give it to the committees to help shape a little bit more the tactical thing. So I'd love to see more of that too in parallel.
I think worth noting too that, a lot of the work that's coming, this is mitigation work for traffic we're expecting from the downs. And so I fear a little bit that people can only digest information in little bits, and we can't be like, here's 10 pages of what's happening and here's why. But we're doing all this work because we're also expecting a lot more traffic over, period of time. But yeah, just reinforcing the point that the more brief, we're so used to digesting things in such little, 140, whatever, little bits that, I think a little bit over, a constant period of time will be helpful to that end for sure. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, the Downs TMP is certainly going to help, but my concern about the majority of the issues in the TMP is that it's going to be very useful along the main corridors like Payne Road or along Route 1 in terms of keeping the traffic moving and reducing the amount of stops. But what it's not addressing, at least from what I can see, or I don't understand it totally, it's not addressing the elimination of traffic through those places. So we really need to focus, I think, on how do we eliminate some of this traffic, because the only thing we can do right now along Route 1 is just keep it moving. It's not going to decrease. So
Alan, this is a terrific segue to our next item.
I was
don't know
going to
if
say, who planted the seed? I mean, that was perfect.
I don't know if you did that on purpose, but A+.
That was perfect. So I will jump right on that and transition to the next item following the chair's lead and Alan's great intro transition points. When we started talking with the Downs 2 and I'm going to now say 3 years ago, it's probably just around this time, 3 years ago, started to have a conversation with the Downs and the DOT around traffic and traffic permitting. One of the early discussions that occurs when a project like of really any size gets underway is they try to look at not only the amount of traffic they're going to create based on the type of use that they're developing, but how much of that traffic can they sort of take credit for? And by that, I mean, internal capture trips are one way where you have a mixed use development. You know, you might say if you looked at two different uses on an island, they're both going to together create 20 trips. But if they're in a mixed use development, those two trips, you get credit for say 5 trips. So really instead of 20 trips out of those two uses, if they're isolated, because they're together, it's really 15 trips.
Because you might go to the post office on your way to the grocery store kind of thing, right?
Yep. Thank you, Jen. Yes. And this is Jen's world. So Jen, step right in and correct me where I go astray. And so that was certainly something that we started looking at with the Downs and part of the process. But then the other discussion started with the Downs saying, well, you know, the type of development we're building here really has the ability to take credit for transit trips, which, you know, to look at it, you say, yep, a dense development of mixed of uses you're talking about. Okay, that probably could support transit. However, there is no transit. And so as that conversation sort of went on with DOT and the Downs and staff, one of the things that staff suggested was, as part of the process, that we really look at what is the viability of transit to the Downs. I think, you know, a number of us in sort of who deal with this professionally can look at and say, it seems like that's going to be a viable thing, but how do we actually get there to have one, you know, we though the development could support transit without actual transit going there. So the first question that we wanted to have sort of evidence of is, yeah, this is the type of development that could support transit. So what the DOT did as part of, and I'm trying to share my talk and share my screen at once, as part of their as part of the permitting process is, actually I'm going to start on this. Oh gosh. All right, so let's start on this page. As part of their permitting process was require the Downs to actually participate towards a transit study. And this was actually a study that the Downs picked up the laboring oar of the costs, but the town also was a partner, as was DOT, and it was actually a GPCOG PAC/PAC study. So they hired the consultants, and so it's this Downs ridership modeling report. To John, one of John's earlier points, on our transportation committee page, we try to list it. We've put a number of transportation studies and reports that have been going on in town over the years are all found here. So if you're ever looking, this is a good place to go. And so at the, oh boy, I guess I'll stay here. So we just received this, the final report. Actually, I think I received it in January, but they must have been, anyway, just a couple of weeks ago. And so this was a 4 or 5 month process, and it was the purpose of the study was very limited in scope, and it was really just about answering the question of would a development such as the Downs support transit? That's really all it's about. It's not a Scarborough specific transit report, because there's lots of other activities occurring along Route 1 and in town. So it's really focused on that narrow question. And the way they looked at it was to basically create these 3 scenarios of transit transit being provided. And they sort of, as the pyramid would indicate, sort of go from the least or from less sort of additional transit down to even more. So under scenario 1, basically they looked at just more frequent P-sub transit, B-sub transit green line. So folks may or may not know that's what the green line is, what runs up and down Route 1 right now. It runs fairly infrequently, about every 2.5 hours. And that's about it. So catch as catch can is really the best we have. This is looking at increasing that to about once an hour. And then the next scenario they looked at was building on that increased green line, actually creating connections over to the South Portland bus system over at the main mall. So now you can tie in to the bigger regional system, as well as creating what they deemed a Breeze South commuter bus. So if you think of you might have heard the Breeze North that runs Falmouth, Yarmouth up to Freeport, I believe. And there's one now, the Husky line that runs out to USM and Gorham. Think along those lines. And then the third scenario they looked at, and this is really took those 2 and then added on top of that rapid transit down Route 1. This is something that's in GP Cog's Transit Tomorrow, 40, 50 year plan or study, I should call it. So it's really a very significant investment. And so really what they did is said, okay, looking at these scenarios based on the development type we have, and I'll send this report out to everyone so you can go through it in more detail. But what's the likelihood that, could we see enhanced transit? So essentially the outcome of the study is down here, and it's throughout the report, but the study demonstrated that full build out in 2040 additional transit service at the Downs could provide a significant boost in number of transit trips taken and support efforts to reduce vehicle miles. And so that gets to the issue that we were talking about, less vehicles on the road, as well as greenhouse gases. And that's really based on these tables. So if you sort of see from, no build out, the different scenarios shows the increased ridership. And actually just up here at the top of my screen, you can sort of see. So I think it's one of the things, again, as I mentioned, without getting too fixated on precise numbers, because a lot of that is variable. The real intent of the study was to say, okay, could the Downs be a catalyst for transit? And essentially the results of this report are yes. What else did I have? There's a couple other things. Oh, I did just want to point out that, as I said, this is a very high level sort of first stone in building the foundation for understanding what transit ridership looks like in town. But, they did just give some very high level cost scenario, scenario 1, $2 bills, scenario 3, heavy investment, right? So you need to weigh sort of the pros and cons of the costs and the gains. Again, just sort of at the very highest level. And so, yeah, I guess here I've just sort of scrolled down to the conclusions and basically conclude that development of similar nature to the Downs will generate meaningful ridership and VMT reduction. This is really the next, this is sort of a next steps. A detailed ridership analysis with optimized service plans would be required prior to implementing any new transit. So just sort of demonstrating that there'd be more work to do, but it's probably worth doing that work if the town wants to explore ways of reducing vehicle trips.
Jay, who did this study? Was this COG?
So PACS, yes. COG, PACS, yes. Yep,
Okay.
they were, yep.
When they did this, did they take a look at the typical profile of the ridership of, say, the Metro or the one coming out of Bedford Saco? Is that the Breeze?
Nope.
Did they
So
take
that, so coming out of Bedford Saco, that is PSUB. So coming back here.
Whether they took a look at the profile of the typical rider?
Oh, did they look at the typical rider? So this study didn't get into that level of detail. It really
See, I think that's important because you've got to have a match there. And the other thing too is I think everything is in such flux right now. And I'll give you a good example. My son-in-law works for WEX, and he would be working in downtown Portland right now, except he's working out of his house. And right now he doesn't know when he may go into downtown Portland. So that would be an example of a professional who might possibly use, public transportation, but I'm not sure. So I think this study would be better off done maybe like in 5 years from now, once everything maybe resettles itself. And
well, yeah, and I think, Roger, you're looking sort of at the next pieces of a study. I think this was sort of at a very high level using, and you can, as when I send this out, you can sort of go through, but they talk about the modeling that they use. They use what they call it, a stops model. Yep, there it is, the stops overview. So, and they used 2015 as their base year. So I think for this level of study, what I sort of heard from the professionals is that they did account for COVID influxes or so. But again, I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. We need to be mindful when we get into actually ridership studies and who those users are going to be. And the next sort of, as it's pointed out on sort of the last page there, what is it? A detailed ridership analysis. When you start to get into that, that's, I think, that the next level of study, that those are very good points to think about.
And the last thing I would say, and I'm not against this, okay? But I think, to the best of my knowledge, just about every form of public transportation, especially surface, runs at a deficit, which is going to have to be subsidized by obviously taxpayers. In other words, fees are not going to solve that problem. So that's another issue you got to deal with. That's why when we talk about, when we're looking at something at the Downs on the planning board, and there's always the question, are you going to have a bus stop there? Well, the buses are not going to go there unless they feel that there's going to be ridership there. And if there's going to be ridership there, then they would consider doing it, but they're just not going to go there because the planning board says we want a bus stop there. So.
Yeah, and I think, Roger, you bring up a good point about sort of the town investment, right? Because it is going to take town investment to get bus service in town. The providers, the way they operate is that various towns pay a large portion of, but I think that's part of the analysis the town might have to go through to say, well, are we spending money to rebuild roads and intersections and add lanes, or are we, or are there other ways to mitigate the traffic impacts? But-
And it's circular too, because you can't, neither side, neither a transit agency nor any municipality or private development, or even a combination of those three, none of them can support the level of, you can't you can't build all phases of a robust transit system at once and then hope people are going to get on the bus. It has to be incremental, because you have to put that bus shelter in, because if you don't have a bus shelter or you don't have a bus stop, no one's going to ride the bus. And then so that I think the graphic, Jay, that you were showing earlier with the pyramid is a really good representation of that. Like, the Husky line is a good example in between Portland and Westbrook, and also the breeze that runs to the north from Portland to some of the outlying communities there. So these are communities that had bus service intermittently, very much, as I understand it, like kind of what we have now. And there was a decision made to provide the next level up transit service. And so as soon as people realize, oh, okay, instead of having a bus come through Scarborough every, I don't even know how often, maybe it's 2.5 hours. If I know it comes every 2 hours, or if it comes every hour, that's now a service that I can use and I can rely on. And then that becomes part of our culture and how we go about our day. It becomes part of how your son-in-law chooses to get to downtown Portland during the day. Maybe a couple chooses to take the bus to go in out for dinner instead of driving a car because parking in Portland is difficult, those kind of things. And so it has to be incremental, and it's expensive at every step. But I think that Jay brings up a good point, which is that as a municipality, we will need to invest in our transportation infrastructure in the future, as we have done in the past. And, in the past, we've added capacity because it's been available. To Alan's point earlier, we're running, there's no capacity left. We're not widening our major thoroughfares. We have, we've after the downs and the town projects are done, with a lot of the work that's coming over the next 5 years, we will have highly optimized almost all of our major signalized intersections. There's no efficiency left to be gained there. So we really have to look at some of these other creative options. And I was reading through a webinar today for something sort of unrelated. And I knew I should have written this down, but a woman had a great quote, which was, to make the safe way convenient, or make the convenient way the safest. And so I think that could, that's a bit relevant here. If it's not safety, then perhaps it's time. If we're interested in getting somewhere more quickly, if you make it quicker and easier for someone to choose this mode of transportation, that is what they will do. If it continues to be quicker and easier for them to hop in their car, and do that, then that is what will happen as well. And the choices that we make, how we choose to get around for different purposes, will continue to be different. So this is not, like Jay said, we're not looking for 0 cars on the road here. There's going to be, if you have a friend that lives out on the Scarborough line in Buxton, you should probably not expect to be able to take a bus to their house to visit for lunch. But, there are certain other types of trips where this service does begin to make some sense, particularly when we are at the forefront of dense development, like we have at the Downs. This is an opportunity that most of our neighboring communities do not have, by which transit does begin to make some sense, because just by the nature of statistics, the more people that you put in one area, the more of them are going to be, viable transit users, I think. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes after this. And transit-oriented development it's a widely known approach to projects and development overall. And this is something that, you know, I am, you know, we're fortunate to have a great team in the Downs and a lot of good partners there. But you know, it's something that I'm impatient. I wish they had led with that. I wish they had come out and said, we want this to be a transit-oriented development, and because of that, we're going to build it this way. Because yes, we have this study now that tells us for sure that this type of development is potentially viable for transit, but like, come on. We probably, like, it would be weird if that wasn't the case. If the study found something other than that, it would have been kind of odd, I think. So it's good to be documented and have it there, but I'm looking forward to the next steps. Yeah, John.
And I would just add, you know, when we formed the Downtown Development Committee, one of the charges that they had, amongst the huge charge that they had, was to think about connectivity. And I think that's the one area that they just kind of scratched the surface on, like, how do we create better connectivity within the greater downtown district, which would include Oak Hill, with the Downs, so that we really do create a true, you know, sense of community, not just at the downtown within the Downs, but within all of, you know, the downtown district. And, you know, again, like tonight, we're talking a lot about like a lot of opportunity challenges. I just feel like trying to narrow in on something that is actionable, which could be like taking that committee's work and adding this group's lens into that to help shape that aspect a little bit more, might be really a good use of this group's minds based on all of your expertise, but also really help advance, you know, and ensuring that when that downtown comes, it really does feel connected to all of Scarborough and it's accessible to all of Scarborough, and we have the right trail connections, transport methods, et cetera, that make it truly a downtown that everybody can leverage. It's not the biggest plot of land, even though it's pretty large. And so minimizing parking by trying to, and encouraging, you know, other parts of transport could be a huge way to change behavior, to get people down there. And again, like, I feel like we only really scratched the surface, and I think this committee could really help to like take that work and dig a little bit deeper potentially.
Noted.
You know, one advantage I have over some of the rest of you is I've lived longer, okay? And when I was growing up as a kid in Massachusetts, I lived in a town with around 10,000 people, but it was a mill town. And it had all, you know, it had the dense, it would be like a Westbrook, you know, where it would have a density of homes around a downtown. And we used to take the bus all the time. The bus came very close to our house every half an hour, public transportation. But what happened though is then in the, I think it was probably the 50s, they started building the malls. And guess what? All of a sudden, people started driving to the malls and they weren't taking the bus anymore. So you do need the density. I mean, it's going to take a whole different mindset, I believe, and you do need the density. And I'd like to ask Jen, I'm kind of curious, do towns, for instance, like Brunswick, Augusta, Lewiston, do they have their own bus service similar to South Portland? Or are they integrated into a larger system?
I know Brunswick, I don't believe Brunswick has their own municipal bus service, but they do rely on, I think they're the last stop, Jay, I don't know if you know that, for the Breeze. So there is sort of a rapid bus line that runs from Brunswick and makes only a few stops between Brunswick and Portland. It drops off at one of Metro's hubs. And there's been very interesting, I heard a summary of that actual line extension in terms of metrics and revenue and ridership that was very against most trends for transit use. And I think this was pre-pandemic. So everything's a little bit different now, but basically, in a nutshell, is very successful in by transit standards. And so what this probably says is that, this is probably a really attractive service for people commuting into Portland. If your drive is 30 minutes, but then you have to park in a garage somewhere and walk for 10 minutes, or you're paying a monthly parking fee, or you're fighting for on-street parking, whatever that is. If you can just take this bus and it's reliable and it works with your working hours, I think they were seeing people do that. I don't believe too many other municipalities in Maine, or not even municipalities, but like metro areas. We don't have metro areas. That's why towns don't have it. Lewis and Auburn probably has their own internal service there. But again, I believe that's sort of infrequent. And this is something that Maine, we don't have dense development. We're not, you don't have to go very far from here where using the bus is widely common. Boston suburbs, and beyond. But because we are to date, we've been lacking in this type of density, and we have so many spread out in rural communities. Yeah, you still have to have a car, and so I really believe that this hurdle is a huge one for our community, right? To introduce transit. If you have transit and you're trying to add like more transit, that's kind of an easier sell. You have a bus line and now you're adding more frequent buses, or you have a robust bus line and that turns into surface light rail or whatever, elevating from the successive steps. I just think it's got to be easier than getting over the first hurdle, which is kind of where we're at. And so, I think proper studying and planning, and then certainly, zoning and land use and development practices play a huge part in that, because if we don't have, and we're not creating dense development, we're not going to be able to support a successful run like this.
Sorry, Jen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I often, one of the things I try to remind myself as we're in these conversations is, it's not sort of, we're not talking about binary choices of it's either going to be this or that. I think it's, as you said, Roger, we've been talking for the 30 or 40 years you've been in town, people have been worried about traffic. Well, for those 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years, all we've been building were single family homes on dead end cul-de-sacs on 2-acre lots. And we were creating transportation issues. So I think, there's certainly, there's always going to be a market for that. And probably most of us on this call are in that type of home, but there's also a market, there's other markets. And so it's, and I think Jen, you also hit it, we're a state of 1.3 million people, a town of 20,000, in New York,
that should be
a
its
small
own
town,
transit
right?
network right there.
So it does make these type of conversations and trying to find those regional transit providers harder because we just don't have. So it's, I think Jen, you hit it. It just becomes a circular question. It's sort of like, oh.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, I grew up in North Andover, Mass, which was part of Greater Lawrence, and Greater Lawrence at that time was a very viable city, very much like Portland is right now. And the thing is, I don't believe with the density that they have down there, I don't think they have commuter bus service right now. You can get on a train or a commuter train and go into Boston from Lawrence or from Andover or North Andover, but I don't think there's any internal bus service within those communities. So if it's not viable in those communities where you have the density, I think it's such a difficult task to change the culture to do that.
I do think one of the, sorry.
Alan, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to get us off track here, but it's just a question for somebody who has a lot more knowledge in terms of how some of these things are used, but how successful have park and rides been? Are those even successful, or?
I know this is
It-
Maine Turnpike's favorite. They like the park and rides.
But I guess my point is though, is that if those aren't being successful, how do we expect mass transit to be? I just, because that's a much smaller piece, right? I mean, you get 4 people to go to one location and then only 4 people go in. So if that's not even working, I just wonder how trying to get bus routes up and running are going to be successful. Just a
Yeah.
thought, I guess.
I think it's, I don't know enough about it to speak to that, about whether or not they are, successful and by what measure. But I do think that, generally, if you think about that, I just think some of the uses might be different. I know, for example, just friends and colleagues that work in this area, live in this area and work in Augusta, for example. If you're regularly commuting with someone and you have, neighbors that are doing the same thing, that park and ride is a good option. But I think over the long term, particularly as we look about how to connect Scarborough with adjacent communities, it's probably all part of the conversation, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, Jay just said, we're a town of 20,000, and I'd argue the census said 22,134, but
I'm a planner. I for big numbers.
but having said that, we're also like I think the 7th or 8th largest community in the state. So that doesn't say a whole lot in terms of how big our towns and cities are. So it just again seems like it would make it a little difficult.
Yeah, I have a question for Jen, maybe, or whoever could maybe answer this question, but I think the point, Jen, that you made that is the good one is like, this is going to be incremental, but getting over that first hump is the hardest thing. So like, what do other towns do in our situation? That's kind of like that starting point. Is it like shuttle services within like a 5-mile radius that's managed by a town, which like shows regional transit companies that, hey, there is viability here and they're doing it. Like, what does that journey look like? And like, how can we actually start? Because like you said, I'm also impatient. I'm like, well, what can we do today to like start to make impact?
Yeah,
Right.
I think a lot of it is starting. I don't think we'd be looking at creating a Scarborough transit provider, right?
Right.
There's already probably,
No.
frankly, arguably, there's many who argue we have too many providers in the region, that there could be much more efficiencies in the administration of the providers. I don't know enough about it to argue it one way or the other, but I've heard that argument. So I think it would be the town, and this is sort of the what's next for us. I think it is saying, okay, we have this report that says this thing we're building that's happening in our town might make transit viable. Hey, Greater Portland Metro, help us. Maybe I could reach out to Greg Jordan, who's the executive director, and ask him to come have a conversation with us and sort of say, I do know just from the meetings that we go to, the 3 providers in the area, we're the hole in the donut, right? There's South Portland, there's Saco Biddeford, there's Portland. They're going out to Westbrook and Gorham. They're going up to Brunswick, Falmouth, Cumberland. So, I'm sure those providers would be happy to come talk to us and sort of say, this is what we're seeing. Because as maybe it was you, Roger, brought it up, we certainly need it's really about, they would know where and what the interest is. That's their world, their expertise. So I think that's probably what our next steps in this type of conversation would be.
We the whole, Jay, because we don't contribute?
What's that? We
Aren't we-
contribute, we contribute very little.
Yeah.
I don't remember how much it is, but it's sort of a nominal amount to,
I think we're the whole, Roger, because culturally and geographically, we haven't had density to support that. So, you know, Biddeford and Saco has a different looking, denser downtown than we do, as does South Portland. And so when you have hubs like that, it makes sense to kind of get people there and get them back out and connect them from that hub to another hub somewhere else that's desirable. I will also just add that for anyone else that's nerdy about it, apparently the transit agencies in general are poised to receive a pretty significant amount of federal funding that's coming down the pipeline. And they are, at least Metro, I can't speak to the others, but I have colleagues that work there. They are robustly interested in increasing their ridership drastically over the short term. So they're looking for ways to make investments and partnerships in how to do that. And so again, I just think it's, you know, it's lots of good pieces all kind of, you know, floating around, and it'll be interesting and you know, good work, time well spent on our behalfs to try and sort through some of that as it comes along, and do what we can to see how that develops here.
So I can look forward to a bus coming down Pleasant Hill Road.
I don't know about that, Roger.
probably right to your house, Roger.
But I will say, John, your question, you know, I grapple with this a lot. Like, what's next? You know, how do we tee ourselves up for good transit here? And I just, honestly, I think about myself and my own family and I have two, you know, school age kids. I work in Portland. It is not convenient for me to take the bus. Like I work 6 miles away from my house, or 8 miles, whatever. That's not a long distance. It's a little bit further than I'd like to bike ride in the morning. And the bike ride is sort of horrific, but that's a story for another day. But so what would service have to look like for somebody like me to choose not to drive my car during commuting time and get on the bus instead? That's kind of you know, you could apply that to any number of other things. What if someone chose not to drive, or you had a different living situation? And so I've even thought about, I've never ridden the bus in Scarborough, I'll say that, but I would like to, because I would like to see what it's like. But when I look up the schedule,
Take your bike with you.
it's really inconvenient. So I'm waiting for scenario 1, or whatever the top of the pyramid is there, where we just get like a little more frequency. And I don't want to go to the mall on the bus, which is where the buses mostly go from here. So.
And I think some of this conversation, and we've been talking about the Downs transit study, but I think it starting to transition maybe to the community survey results, if that seems appropriate.
Yes, let's do that quickly, because we're taking too much time.
Yep. And Jonathan, I think, I certainly want to give you a moment to talk about it, but certainly, a couple of things that seem to have popped out and resonated are issues around affordable housing, growth, but certainly traffic as it relates to this committee. Traffic was one of the main items that popped up, and people sort of talk about ease of getting around town. And I think, one of the results to one of the questions I think is really interesting, because it sort of speaks to issues more about pedestrian travel and bicycles. But Jonathan, do you want to give a little background on the community survey before say anything else?
Sure. Yeah. So the results are posted online, and again, we went out to, I think, 4,000 households and got about 862 responses back. So they're scientifically valid results. We also have another set of data for people who didn't get the mailed survey, where we're still waiting for those final results to be tabulated, just to understand the differences between the two populations. But I think Jay summarized it well in terms of some of the key takeaways. You know, one thing I think we took away was, you know, the customer service provided by the town is excellent. It's really best in class, and the survey provider, who benchmarks across hundreds of communities nationally and regionally, said Scarborough scored the highest he's ever seen just in terms of customer service. So it's a big kudos to the town staff and all the work they put in to help making sure that the community is taken care of. Jay mentioned affordable housing, affordability and taxes, and growth and traffic as kind of the key concerns. And so again, I think as we set our council goals, I think we had a lot of these items in mind kind of based on the survey. Traffic was the one we spent the least time talking about. And again, I think like Roger, like you said, and others, you know, this isn't necessarily new in the comp plan. There was a lot of data around traffic concerns, which is why we created that vision statement that Jay pulled up, because we know it's a challenge to solve. I just don't think we have, you know, quite the plan in place for what we need to do near term to address that. One of the things when I got those survey results, again, like I mentioned, I reached out to Angela just to be like, hey, help remind me, because I know we're doing a lot of stuff, but I don't recall or know because it's not always top of mind or discussed. So I did learn a lot just from the stuff she shared that I know she's brought into this committee, because I think that was where I saw it before. But I think one of the things that she brought up, which I don't know when's the last time this group has reviewed it, but I think it's the transportation study, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, that goes up, that's supposed to go through 2025 or 2035.
You're talking
That
about
was
the 2005 townwide transportation study? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I think it's actually through like 25. Yeah, it's only got another.
Yeah. So that
Go ahead.
that to me is at the point of maybe needing to get refreshed and revisited. And I don't think it contemplated kind of where we are right now, right? Like a lot of the things we've discussed tonight, things have changed a lot probably since 2005. And we have a better sense of where we're going now that we have the comp plan and the downs and everything, which is going to just change the fabric of the community long term. And so that might be something, you know, through this budget process to potentially endorse or push forward, if that's something Jay and Angela feel like is important to move forward as a result of the survey, to make sure we kind of refresh that study and really kind of have a new baseline. I think, Jen, you mentioned it maybe a couple meetings ago, or maybe it was in one.
I mentioned it once a long time ago before you were even a counselor, and I'll never forget Jay's reaction, which was like, whoa, that's a huge effort.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's when we were embarking on a comp plan as well. It's like,
yeah,
oh boy.
sure.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but I'm so happy to hear you bring that to the table, because yes, it is a huge effort, but also, yes, we really need it, because without an assessment of what we have, you know, on the ground level, you know, those of us on the planning board, we see one project in after another, and everybody comes to the table with their, you know, requisite trip generation report for the housing units that they're going to build. And we say that, and we see, yep, okay, you're adding 20 trips to these intersections, and you pay your fee and you come on board. Great. But what we don't understand is we don't know the capacity of that intersection. We don't know how much room is left. So how could we, you know, and I know this is a point of frustration and probably led to a lot of the comments received as part of the survey. That's how you get traffic, is when when you're not clear on what you already have, and then you keep adding to it in different ways. So yeah, certainly anything that this committee can do to help to that end, I think it would be just a valuable exercise for our town for all the reasons that you mentioned and more.
Yeah, and I think it would be good to understand.
Sorry, just because we're actually, not only are we at the end of that other study, but we've actually had significant analysis done on our community already as of late with the work that the Downs has done. And so, most communities, when these plans run out, they're kind of back to the drawing board on that. But with the expiration of our prior transportation plan, in conjunction with new development coming and all the traffic analysis that they and everyone else has just done looking at our community, they really have we have a leg up on a lot of those things. They've studied the big intersections, but the things that they haven't looked at, which we kind of touched on earlier, are what are the next level, what's happening at those next tier intersections, or further out. So yes, I think that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. So the only other thing I'll add about the survey specifically, that again, if you're into data and want to look into it, on the town website, there is a dashboard at the end where you can kind of, select certain demographics or look at different locations to see how they may have surveyed. So again, public transportation scored really, really low relative to other areas. And so we could actually try and geolocate where those respondents by I think census district live, to better target and understand where the dissatisfaction is. Is it really in the dense areas where we would anticipate seeing a high demand for public transportation, or is it coming out of other areas? And I think when we were live in the review, I think Councillor Johnson did some playing, and I think he quickly identified stuff. So I think it just could be helpful data to this group to mine at some point to help pinpoint specific issues where traffic seemed to be a bigger concern. I want to say, and again, there's geo maps and stuff that kind of break down the survey too, that you guys could look at. So I would just, encourage you guys, when you have time, maybe spend 10-15 minutes on there playing with it, looking at it through the lens of this committee or anything you're interested in, just to see how you think that data gets broken down a little bit more.
Great, thank you.
The next item I was going to update on was the, we're getting close to 8 o'clock. So the Payne Road and Gorham Road high crash location safety audit report. So some members may remember this back in 2019, PAX asked municipalities to take a look at the high crash locations in the region, particularly in their town, and identify those that we felt, or each municipality felt, was sort of the highest priority warrant. And so as a committee, we reviewed that and put forward two of our high crash locations, Payne Road in Gorham and Payne Road in Muzzy. Out of the 18 PAX communities, PAX chose 10 intersections to study. One of Scarborough's was selected, and that was the Payne Road and Gorham intersection. And so they have provided us and this is just about looking at, really what they did is they performed an analysis regarding the types of crashes at the intersection, along with field reconnaissance that helped inform the safety audit. That safety audit is on the Transportation Committee's website for those that are interested. But some of the outcomes or recommendations, I should say, were to install retro-reflective backplates on the signal heads to make them more visible, coordination of traffic signals. This gets to our smart traffic signals, if you will, or the adaptive traffic signals. Install advanced detection. Do some speed feedback sign. When you see these on some roads, you're driving along, it tells you you're going too fast. And then the other one that folks might, that was maybe the biggest physical improvement, was actually to extend the center median to prohibit left turn lanes as you're coming up Gorham Road to Payne Road. And if you can think of the Cumberland Farms has the Delta Island, it's supposed to be right in, right out, that everyone takes a left out of. That might have done it a time or two myself. But really sort of putting something there, a physical barrier to inhibit that type of movement, because that was identified as one of the main areas of concern. interestingly enough, a number of these issues, I think all but the speed feedback signage are actually being looked at, or components of the Downs TMP. So will be implemented here in the near future. So we just wanted to provide an update on that process and what the results were there.
Yeah, John.
Jay, I think it's a good example, going back to the conversation we had at the beginning of the meeting about trying to connect the dots a little bit for the community on some of these great things that are happening that I just don't think people know about. The fact that we had that study done that identified those problems and recommendations that's now supported by the Downs TMP, to me, just like connects the dots to make the great work that the town is doing more visible. And so trying to like keep these nuggets top of mind and thinking about how we communicate it out, because we can direct them back to the transportation committee website where all this stuff is. So I just think it's just, I think that's a big opportunity for this group to think a little bit more about, is like how to educate and get the information a little bit more out to the public. Like I love what you said, Jen, about, being advocates within our networks, but I think there is the opportunity to think to, knowing that this is a big concern and knowing a lot of great stuff is happening, how do we just make it more visible? And, that's just a really good example where I feel like we can make it a 150 word snippet somehow and get it out on social media, get it out. I could write a counselor corner on it or whatever, just to make sure that people are more in the know of what's going on with all this great work.
Jay, not to, we don't have to get too in depth in it tonight, but maybe in the future, I've long been so impressed with Scarborough's GIS system and the information that we make available to the public in that way. I wonder if Jay and I spent a little bit of time earlier today looking through DOT has a map viewer for their work plan that was just released. And so, Jay, I don't know if there's some opportunity to add sort of a simple layer, doesn't necessarily need to be as in-depth as what DOT has, but just a graphical representation that might allow people to quickly see what's on deck.
Yeah, interesting. I've talked to our GIS coordinator, but that's certainly an interesting idea.
Regarding the comment Jonathan just made about putting information on the town, on the transportation's, page. I'm afraid if you put it there, nobody will ever see it. You gotta reference it on the main page, say, latest transportation issues or something, please go to this link or something like that, because people won't see it. They won't go that far.
I think I just spend a lot of time on the website, maybe more so than most people.
I have like 3 things I'm going to go look up whenever we're done with this meeting.
Yep, that's always the challenge, knowing that most people do just go on for a quick click. And if it's not right top and center, they're not going to see it. So how do you, of all the things that are happening, I mean, we've just mentioned a half dozen anyway for this committee, and we have 30 other committees doing equally cool stuff. It's like, man, there's a lot to try to keep people informed of. But
I think we're at an advantage because the nature of our topics here are like map based. So that's a good graphic there. And then you don't need very many words at all. You can just hit them with a picture.
Yeah. So the next thing I just that we put on the agenda, so we started talking about the traffic impact fee revisions. Last meeting, I guess it was. Angela and I continue to work with our consultants. So I don't have much in the way of update tonight, but just want to let you know that work is continuing, and we'll have something a little more significant. Certainly we'll have more significant than what I'm saying right now for you in February. But I just wanted to sort of let you know that we're continuing to work on that, as we know, as we've talked about with the Downs coming along and a lot of the improvements getting made that were identified for these impact fees. It's time for us to refresh those. So
Not
I would
that it's
just
going
add-
to happen anytime soon, but this is another place where having an updated transportation plan would help
Yes.
inform where we should be collecting impact fees down the road. No pun
Yep.
intended.
Yeah, I would just add, this was something that came up in the council goals that could become a goal for this year, is just the concerted effort to revisit and evaluate all of our impact fees. So I think there's good alignment between keeping that moving with this group as we better align on what that goal actually means and is. So it's good that this team is already kind of going down that path, and Jay, you're already kind of looking at it.
Great. That's what staff had. Last item on there was an other. So I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to address. I know we're pushing the time of the committee, so happy to. What did I do with the agenda? There it is. And if not, Jen, I know we also have opportunity for public comment.
Yeah, do we have anybody else?
However, I
in the
do
public?
not see anyone in the anyone in attendance. So
Okay.
and after that, I believe
If there's nothing else,
Didn't the public know we'd be talking about traffic tonight? Where are they?
who wouldn't want to sit in on this meeting?
So, though I will say, when I mentioned that we were having this meeting at the last council meeting, one of the counselors did say that there are a couple people who had expressed interest to him, like, how do I watch what they did, what they talk about? So the fact that we're recording, I think, is good, and it's on YouTube, because I don't know if that was, pre-COVID a practice, but I think given what this group is focused on and traffic, there is the opportunity, I think, to get more visibility, more participation, potentially. I think people are more comfortable participating probably in a committee meeting than they may be coming to a council meeting or something. So hopefully we can start to see more people coming to this if they really are interested in traffic.
How would we go about furthering the conversation between this committee and the downtown committee that you were talking about earlier?
Their work is kind of, I mean, they submitted their project and it's done. It might be worth, extending an invite to the chair and vice chair potentially to come and share specifically what that group talked about as it related to connectivity and transportation. Again, I would say they scratched the surface, but have some high level ideas that you guys could potentially build upon. So it might be something to consider of having Travis or somebody come and just share some of their findings.
and we have that report that's also online. So lots of links coming your way,
More
guys.
things now to look up.
Lots of links coming your way. So get excited.
Great. Well, thank you. If no one has anything else, we will motion to adjourn.
So move.
Steve's waving goodbye. I'm going to take that as a second.
All right, great. Sounds good. Okay,
All right.
thank you all.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.